Let's get to the story, April. I think it's time.
Yeah. Story number
time.
1. Many stories to
Man,
cover.
story number 1. This is a big one. So let me kind of set the stage. And by the way, we did cover this when it was first kind of breaking now almost 2 years ago. I have 2 podcast episodes I'll give you guys so you can listen to it in detail. But for a lot of you out there might not be familiar with the name Mike Bickle. Other people just got chills and got a knot in their stomach when I said that person's name. Mike Bickle was the main driver, the founder behind the International House of Prayer. I'm going to summarize a lot into a pretty succinct statement. The International House of Prayer was born in the more charismatic space of evangelical thinking, and Mike Bickle and that whole organization really pioneered like the pray in your garage movement, right? Like setting up all these different prayer spots around the U.S. and the world to just usher in the second coming of Christ. Ultimately, it was really high on prophecy and really high on authority. Really high on, God is speaking through me to you, so listen to my words, etc. So that's kind of the general, summary of that. Now there are some great resources. Someone just put in the comments, I'll put it here too, that Jen from Fundy Fridays has a great deep dive on IHOP Kansas City, which is great. And then also for those of you who want to know, on our podcast, it's episode numbers. I wrote them down. I think I did. Episode numbers 187 and 190. We actually had people who were part of IHOP come on the show and talk about their experience and what was going on. So about 2 years ago, roughly, sometime in 2023, there was a massive expose done that Mike Bickle was, just for the sake of the algorithm, was SAing people, that there was assault happening. And it took off, and they were pretty credible. Even like leadership in the church acknowledged it. Well, fast forward to today, and a report came out. They finally had the third-party report get dropped. I'm going to share with you all my screen. I just want to warn you, this next segment of the show is pretty intense language, so just be aware of that, friends, because it's intense. So here's what happens. This is according to Julie Roy, the Roy's report. Mike Bickle sexually abused 17 women, according to this investigation. So I'm going to read a couple paragraphs here for the audience on podcast. Here's what it says, according to the Roy's report. Mike Bickle, founder of the International House of Prayer, Kansas City, groomed and sexually abused 17 women, some of whom were minors, according to an independent investigation released tonight. This is a couple days ago, of course. In some cases, the abuse constituted rape, the investigation found. Quote, throughout the investigation, we have identified and interviewed 17 survivors who were either sexually abused or experienced sexually abusive misconduct, including sexual abuse, rape, clergy abuse, and spiritual abuse perpetrated by Bickle, beginning to our knowledge in the mid-1970s, stated the report by Firefly Independent Sexual Abuse Investigations. Quote, these acts of abuse have had profound and lasting impacts on the lives of the victims, causing significant emotional, psychological, and spiritual harm. Bickle and his executive leadership team, ELT, also responded to reports of sexual abuse with, quote, deliberate indifference and discouraged victims from involving law enforcement, the report added. And then another quote from the report, and we'll get your thoughts on this, April. This indifference not only exacerbated the trauma experienced by the victims, but also allowed the perpetrators to evade accountability and continue their misconduct. So this is a damning report. I mean, it is very clear what happened, right? And we're not talking about, first off, let me just say before I say this, any instance of sexual assault is evil and horrible and inhumane, period. It doesn't matter. The number count doesn't matter as far as the depravity of that, right? 17. And that's what the report found. That's who decided to come forward. There could be more. We don't know. 17, including some of whom were minors. This is one of the most shocking reports I can think of in my recent memory covering the evangelical and church worlds for the past 4 or 5 years. It's unreal.
This is the result of a culture that values protecting a ministry more than anything else. Because Mike Bickle's not the only person at fault here. I mean, what he did is egregious for
Yes.
sure.
Yep.
But almost as bad are all of the leaders who covered up for him, who victim blamed, who said, who told women, don't tell anybody, like don't involve law enforcement. It reminds me of what the situation with Ravi Zacharias, several years
Yes.
ago before he passed. Like he had sexually abused multiple women as well, and had told them, if you tell someone, you are going to risk losing millions of souls. Like that is just pure evil. Not only to abuse someone is bad enough. To assault someone, to violate their body in a way that is inhumane is absolutely disgusting. But then to tack on spiritual abuse on top of it, to make those women feel guilty. Also, this group, IHOP, and then a lot of white evangelicalism, or evangelicalism in general, is very steeped in purity culture, where you are taught, especially for women, that your worth is in whether or not you are sexually pure and a virgin when you get married.
That's right.
And they do not teach consent.
That's right.
So you have a lot of women in this scenario who are becoming victims of Mike Bickle, probably who was their spiritual leader. And I would imagine, as someone who has been essayed myself, that you feel so much shame and you feel dirty and you feel disgusting, and because you are taught that once you cross certain lines, you are no longer valuable. Your worth has been diminished because of something you did not choose. And that does a number on a psyche that can take a lifetime to heal from.
I didn't know that that part about your story.
Yeah.
God, it makes you so angry. I'm so sorry. It's just, God, it is very difficult to watch the pattern over and over again, right? Like this is not like an unprecedented situation of a church leader, doing this, right? And, I mean, April, first off, thank you for even sharing that publicly about your own life. It's just so brave, and it's powerful and tragic. But you and I have talked about this before, how many examples of this stuff do we need before evangelicalism kind of wakes up that it has a problem on its hands? And to be clear, right, because this always happens in the comments, it's not just evangelicalism. I know this happens anywhere. Okay, abuse can happen anywhere. It can happen in the Catholic Church. It can happen in other religious sects. It can happen in public schools. No doubt, people of all shapes and sizes can do horrible things to other people. But we are Christians, and we were raised in an evangelical mindset and world that told us if we followed these steps, we would be honoring God and honoring our bodies, and that we would be safe, right? And so the problem and the atrocity is that it turns out that rhetoric was actually weaponized against a lot of people, mostly women, but also men, and caused them grave bodily harm. And when that was done to them by a spiritual leader, the church, instead of thinking about the person who was marginalized and oppressed and victimized at no fault of their own, was then told to keep this quiet because that's what God would want. And that's really what makes this extra insidious, right? Sexual assault in and of itself by default is a horrible, heinous, life-altering thing that happens to another human, period. When you add the God card and it's from someone that you saw as speaking on behalf of God to you, especially in the world of the charismatic movement where prophecy is a big deal. So it's not uncommon for someone to say, God has given me a word to give you. And that creates some kind of dynamic between follower and leader. And Mike Bickle in this world was almost seen as like a Messiah figure. And again, you go back to our podcast episodes, 187, 189, to listen to the actual people inside of that world. When that person does that to you, right? What does that tell you about what God is like, or who is God, or who God is like? And then when the church leaders cover it up, and remember, according to the report, they exacerbated the situation. That is such that's so much compounding trauma on one person. It is reprehensible. It's reprehensible that this is happening to people over and over again. And evangelicalism as a monolith, as a group, still is too focused on protecting women in women's sports. Like, that's the threat for them, but not the men in their own spaces who are sexually assaulting their women. It's unreal.
I have been around Christian men my entire life. And I've been around a lot of trans people in the last few years as I've allowed myself to become friends with people the church told me I shouldn't be friends with.
Yep.
And let me tell you, I have never once felt unsafe around a trans woman, but I have felt unsafe around Christian men more times than I can count.
Absolutely.
And I'm not the only one who feels that way. Like, I feel like so much of what they accuse is just projection because, and we talked about this last week, the percentages of abuse in churches is off the charts. You are far more likely to get assaulted or abused in a church pew than you are at a drag show, than you are in a locker room with the trans person. Like, bar none. That doesn't happen. And they're pointing the finger to all of the people that are actually just trying to exist and live their lives, who have had hard lives. There is no person out there who decides to become a trans woman just for the attempt to assault a woman in a woman's bathroom. There's zero men who are doing that. Yep. They can just assault women. Honestly, if they just want to assault women, become a freaking evangelical pastor. That's the easier path.
Much easier. You have an army of yes men around you to protect you, right? You don't feel an obligation to report any abuse to law enforcement because you are the law. You're the spiritual authority, right? These systems are built to protect the men at the top of them. I mean, another example that we've covered many times is John MacArthur, right? A very well-known, famous evangelical pastor who, by the way, preaches the shittiest theology you ever heard. But regardless of that, 2 very damning reports came out that he covered up the sexual abuse of children that was done by 2 men on his own staff. And it's the same pattern, by the way. When we see it in this Mike Bickle story. Leaders encourage victims, don't go to police. We'll handle it internally. Don't go after the man of God. We'll handle this, in-house. And in John MacArthur's case, he publicly shamed the wife of one of the men who did this because she would not reconcile with her husband. There's a video of him publicly shaming Eileen Gray from the pulpit because she wouldn't repent and reconcile with her abusive husband, who 2 years later sexually abused her own children. Right? This is the madness that we grew up in, April. This is a madman logic that we're dealing with. And so Mike Bickle, as absolutely tragic and horrible and evil as it is not at all surprising because the ingredients are the same. The evangelical world, even through different theological paradigms and different views on different things, it's the same core ingredients that go into what builds their structures. It's usually centered around a man, usually a charismatic man. Maybe he's a great communicator or orator who has in their mind is seen as someone who is speaking on behalf of God. He builds something really big. He gets all this attention. Maybe the evangelical ecosystem of news and media and publishing and social media picks him up and he gets really famous. And then all these men come around him to protect him because that's God's anointed. And then that power, right, leads to some kind of corruption. It could be financial embezzlement. It could be, as we covered before, trying to seek out a minor for prostitution. We've covered that story before. That was in Virginia. And then when it happens, instead of the accountability being aimed at the pastor, it's actually aimed at the victims, further re-traumatizing the victim. And then that person is cast to the side as the troublemaker, and the pastor is protected. We have seen this so many times. And still, evangelicals are not willing to think about the systems that they built as a church. and think maybe we have to rethink this. Maybe we have to renegotiate not the church idea, right? The gathering of the believers, worshiping God and loving their neighbor. That's a beautiful concept. It's the structures we've mapped onto it. One last example of this, so the audience really understands, especially if you're new. Maybe you're finding us through the algorithm, or like you don't know what we're talking about. This is so not unprecedented. What was it, 2 years ago, April? The SBC, Southern Baptist Convention, they were found to be hiding decades of sexual assault and sexual abuse happening inside of their churches. Decades. And what did the SBC do? First off, they fought tooth and nail for any kind of reform. To this day, there hasn't been a whole lot. But I will tell you what they did do as a group, because they had their big convention a year and a half ago. There's a big megachurch run by a pastor called Rick Warren. He ordained a woman as a pastor in their church. Now, he's part of the SBC conglomerate, and they do not believe that women should be pastors. 80% of the delegates, when they assembled, voted to kick Rick Warren and his church out of their assembly because he ordained a woman. But a lot of the churches that were found to be covering up sexual abuse are still part of the SBC. Do you see the madness? Do you see how unbelievably nuts this idea is? But this is the system. This is what these systems are built on, April. And so why are we shocked? Why are we shocked when we're getting the same result over and over again? We shouldn't be. We shouldn't be.
It's a rotten system. But you know what?
It's a rotten system.
It makes sense, though, why they had no problem voting for a rapist.
Bam. Nailed it. Absolutely.
And the whole, like, don't touch God's anointed. That is ingrained in your psyche.
Do you want to play the clip? Should we play the clip that you pulled about the prophet talking about Trump being one of his apostles? Because people really think, April, they think, oh, you're exaggerating. No one is saying this stuff. Okay. Let me show you all something. Okay, this is why this show and the work that you're doing, April, and that many of us are doing is so important. Because people think that we're exaggerating. Because you're right. Donald Trump is a convicted rapist. He was found liable in a court of law for raping Eugene Carroll and had to pay her money back, right? We know because he's bragged about it on a hot mic that he grabs women. He's on his third marriage, yada, yada, yada. How do Christians today view Donald Trump? Well, here's someone, Johnny Enlow. He's in the more prophetic, charismatic world. So one of the big separators would be charismatics believe in speaking in tongues, and they also believe in hearing from God directly via prophecy, etc. It's a different world than John MacArthur.
He's also a big 7 Mountain Mandate guy.
Oh, yes, of course, which believes that Christians like them have an obligation and a divine command to rule over the 7 spheres of influence. Okay, here's what he said the other day. Here you go.
The apostolic clarity that's coming right now is coming from King Donald Trump, but it extends even over the church because he is a fellow believer, and every single one of his values that he lays out there are biblical values. Apostle Trump.
Yeah.
Let's go with Prophet Elon. There's some things the Lord showed me. Archangel Michael is working very closely with Trump.
Wow.
Archangel Gabriel working very closely with Elon.
This is in the DNA, friends. Trump is an apostle. Trump is King Trump. King Trump.
It's giving golden calf.
Yes, because it is like, again, do not be gaslit. These people worship Trump. So you're right, April. It's no surprise that white evangelicals would be in the tank for Donald Trump, and why sexual assault would not be a deterrent. Because many of their leaders, right? Many, who, by the way, many of which are still in power, John MacArthur being one of them. It's just par for the course. And what do? They employ a legitimizing narrative. This is from Scott Coley, a great philosopher. He talks about the idea that what people do in authoritarian movements in particular is they create a narrative in their head that legitimizes their result, right? So, for example, why was King David never brought up with Joe Biden? Right? Why did we never hear the argument, listen, no one's perfect. King David wasn't perfect, and Joe Biden's not perfect. Maybe he missed some things, but no one's perfect. Why did we never hear that comparison? But the second Trump is in office, well, he's just like King David, guys. You know, God can use anyone. God can use anyone. Now, of course, the story is, we all know in the scripture, because we actually read the Bible, that King David repented, like egregiously repented. He wrote the Psalms repenting. Trump doesn't repent, but the legitimizing narrative is enforced, right? Just like our divine hero David, Trump isn't perfect. And that reinforces the narrative that, hey, our guy's in power. This is how the world works, and it is infuriating to watch. Infuriating. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to see more of our content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the work that we do, you can donate at the link below. We are a 501c3 nonprofit and make all of this content completely paywall free. Thanks so much.